Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Soroki, Data Coordinator for the Core Network. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's workshop titled Storytelling Through Data, Exploring Interactive Tools for Grant Writing and Reporting. We are excited to host you for this virtual session and hope that you'll jump in and engage with your fellow attendees. Next to the video, you'll see the chat and Q&A features. Use the chat feature to message with other attendees watching alongside you. In the Q&A window, you can answer questions posted by the session presenter or direct a question to them. You'll also have access to any workshop materials on the session page. Today, this presentation will be discussing the importance that storytelling plays in the core movement and how you can use data to best showcase your core's work. Our presenter will be sharing what tools exist and how they can enhance the content you include in your grant writing and reporting efforts. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our presenter, Kayla Kelly-Slatten, who is a founding member of KKS Strategies LLC, and she'll take it away from here.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to host this workshop on storytelling through data. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. Oftentimes, data is presented as pure numbers, but data is not black or white. You can utilize data in a creative manner to help shape your story. As conservation cores, it is important that you all know what tools are out there to help support you in your storytelling efforts, whether that is for the development of a grant or for project reporting. The tools we will review are not the only tools available, but should give you an idea of the range of information, platforms, and applications that are out there. Before we begin, just a quick overview of this workshop. We'll take a look at the value of data, something I've briefly touched on before, diving into available tools. We'll spend the majority of time examining free interactive tools and how to apply them before wrapping up with an interactive activity. For this virtual session, I do want to note that the questions and interactive activity will be presented, and I encourage you all to think and discuss them with your internal folks and among your peers. Take a moment to think about what challenges you, your staff, and your colleagues face about grant writing and reporting. Or if you find it annoying or frustrating, ask yourself why. As a grant writer myself, one of the challenges I often face is knowing how to start. Background research and looking at the data can be really useful to help find that starting point. So let's take a quick look at the value of data. Data gives you a purpose, a mission, how many core members to recruit, how many lives to change, how much acreage to restore, and the list goes on. Data can also support your grant writing, providing key facts to back up your funding request. Once funding is acquired, funders want to see outcomes and not just anecdotal. While core member stories are powerful, data can help break down a budget into tangible and visible accomplishments in your reporting. Data also helps show you how to improve projects for the next time. No project is perfect. Funders expect to see lessons learned. So utilize data to show how you all can improve the project to have a greater impact next time. Overall, data gives you a baseline to develop projects, programs, and work towards meaningful change. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. This quote is something to take away from this presentation. You have to utilize the data, not just state what it is. Moving on to question 2, think about what's working for you now. What's not working? What are you curious about? Data can be very boring, but luckily there are so many tools and platforms to help capture and visualize data. So let's take a look at some of those available tools. These tools are open to the public. They are online platforms that mostly utilize GIS to map data. We'll take a look at a variety of tools focusing on 4 main categories: grant writing, environmental, diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility, or DEIA, and geographic specific. Grant writing tools are not a form of data to be applied, but they can be used to help the grant writing process. I'm sure many of you have heard of the ChatGPT OpenAI free assistant that can be used to help start the grant writing process. While it should not be used to complete a grant application since it does not know the intricacies of your organization, it can be used to help fill gaps and provide baseline background information. Others that are coming online soon include Bard from Google and Sydney from Bing. Neither of these are open to the public yet. Currently, ChatGPT is free, but it won't remain free forever, so I suggest that you try it while you can. In our first exercise, I encourage you all to open ChatGPT. You can just Google ChatGPT and it'll ask you to set up an account. I promise you, they're not going to send you a million emails. It's a quick, just little bit of a questionnaire about who you are. And then type the following statement into ChatGPT, filling in the blank. So write a short paragraph about the benefits of blank, either a word or a phrase. On the next slide, I have an example of what I used to fill in that blank. So I filled it in with write a short paragraph about the benefits of workforce development programs. And as you can see, the AI assistant produced a small, short paragraph that's relatively decent for background information. It states that workforce development programs provide a wide range of benefits, acquiring new skills, new knowledge, improving their employability, fostering employee engagement and retention, promoting economic growth and stability. So all things that we know that workforce development programs can do for our youth and for other individuals and the general public. So try this activity out, see what you get, and then also play around with it and see how you might be able to utilize it in your grant writing. Our second category of tools will explore environmental platforms, taking a look specifically at flood risk, wildfire risk, drought conditions, sensitive habitats, soils, protected rivers, environmental compliance, and dam inventory. I have used all of these in practice, so I will be as candid as I can with you about their use. Our first tool is the FEMA Flood Map Service Center. Traditionally, this is used for flood insurance purposes, but is also very handy to depict flood risk in general. When we talk about flood risk, we are referring to both coastal and riverine flood zones. Additionally, FEMA's Flood Map Service Center is great for showing high hazard zones. Flood risk opens up a lot of potential funding streams, including federal and state resiliency grants and hazard mitigation. It also highlights collaborative partnerships with local communities that can apply for funding not available to the general public or to community-based organizations. So when we go to the FEMA Flood Map Service Center, you will be asked to type in an address or coordinates. I used my parents' old address for this example. And we are presented with a flood insurance rate map, or a FIRM, and a flood insurance study, a FIZ. Both of these provide critical risk information. So when we have the data, it's a very useful tool and provides a lot of information. So on the screen here, you will see I've color-coded the amount of data information that we have. So in red, that's the project location. It's a PIN. The panel number is the green text that you see along with the effective date map. And then you also have in purple the community number. So for the city of Long Beach, it's 060136. And then in yellow, what I've circled are the zone. So it'll show based on zone, it's your flood risk and your elevation of storm surge. And 6 is the white box, and this is your coastal transect. While I'm not going to go into details about the significance of all of these in regards to, reading a FIRM, because that's a whole course in and of itself, I do suggest that you play around with finding flood hazards in your local communities, because it can really impact what you do with that data and how you apply it to a project. Similarly, just because the FIRM does not depict risk does not mean that there is no risk. So a lack of data does not mean that flooding does not occur. It just opens up the opportunity for ground truthing and potential projects. So in this case, we're in the city of Detroit, and this is City of Detroit, Oregon. And you can see that the limit of the study is highlighted in that double yellow line, and it just ends. Well, that doesn't mean that there's no flood risk beyond that limit. That just means that there hasn't been any data collection of that flood risk. So those zones are labeled Zone D, and it just means that there is a lack of data and that more data needs to be collected. The FEMA Flood Map Service Center can be used for projects such as debris removal after a storm, beach or dune restoration projects, removal of invasive species, removal of sediment, and even construction of culverts. Moving on to our next tool, wildfire risk. This particular tool is a product of a collaboration between the USDA, US Forest Service, and nonprofits. It highlights risk to homes, exposure type, wildfire likelihood, and vulnerable populations. Like the FEMA Flood Mapper, it is a national inventory. This example shows Pasadena, California, a community that abuts the Angeles National Forest along the wildland-urban interface. The view we are looking at shows risk to homes, and you can see that at the top of your screen. You can decide if you want to show only the populated areas or show all of the land. So at the top, you'll see risk to homes, exposure type, wildfire likelihood, and vulnerable populations, those 4 categories I briefly mentioned before. And then at the top left-hand corner of the actual map itself, you can see that I have it toggled on to only show populated areas. If you wanted to see all of the landscape, you can show all lands. So this is an interesting tool because it briefly summarizes the amount of risk that a community faces. So populated areas in Pasadena have, on average, greater risk than 45% of communities in California. Using the same wildfire tool, we move to the Navajo Nation in Arizona. This view shows wildfire likelihood. Again, you can toggle between the views. So populated areas in Navajo Nation Reservation in the Arizona portion have on average greater wildfire likelihood than 9% of tribal areas and counties in Arizona. So projects that may benefit from this type of tool include fuels reduction, wildfire burn scar restoration, and even trail maintenance. Our third tool is a national inventory of drought conditions. So I'm sure many of you have actually seen this tool recently. And this platform is from a collaboration among USDA, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, US Department of Commerce, and NOAA. The US Drought Monitor shows the intensity and impact from drought, as well as provides weekly drought summaries. So as you can see, I selected Kansas for no particular reason, just to mix things up. And when you select a state, it'll break it down by county, and you can see both daily and historic data that are available. So next to the map directly, you'll see that this map was released on Thursday, February 16th, and the data is valid through February 14th of 2023. So it'll clearly show you the intensity of the drought, as well as the areas in the state that are impacted by that drought. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see more detailed statistics. And this is interesting because you not only have the day-to-day data, but you also have historic data. So if there's a pattern of drought, you'll be able to pick up on that. Another interesting fact about this tool is that it shows the estimated population impacted particularly by this drought. So I find that useful to imply about how many individuals are actually being impacted directly by drought. So example projects that might use this tool include water conservation projects, rain gardens, stormwater capture projects, and even some irrigation projects. Moving on to our next set of tools, I've combined both of these because they're both from the US Fish and Wildlife Service. One is the Wildlife Services Wetlands Mapper, and the other is the Information for Planning and Consultation, or the IPAC tool. And so both of these will show sensitive habitats and protected species. So we'll first look at the National Wetlands Inventory, and I've selected Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So you can see that when you go into this tool, you will be asked to, of course, plug in a location, so you can utilize coordinates, or you can utilize an address. And when you actually populate that, it'll pull up all the wetlands and the water ecosystems of that area. So in Camp Lejeune, we're looking at mostly freshwater forested shrub wetlands, and you can see that we also have labeled the estuarine and marine deep water areas. You see a little bit of that lime green, which is also freshwater emergent wetlands, but mostly the forested shrub wetlands. Project examples that would utilize National Wetlands Inventory include restoration of wetlands, removal of invasive species, debris collection and removal, and even habitat monitoring. Similarly, we move on to the IPAC, or the Information for Planning and Consultation tool. So instead of just typing in a location, you will be asked to generally look for the location, and then you can draw your polygon when you're in this tool. So maybe it's just a small circle of an area that you want to look at for a particular project, or maybe it's a larger area that you need to map out. So I'm still in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I've created my polygon here, indicated by the blue lines and the blue square. And once I click confirm, it'll populate it'll populate mammals, birds, reptiles, insects, and flowering plants that are considered endangered, threatened, or sensitive. So just FYI, this does not take the place of a consultation, but it can help inform projects and potentially identify the need for consultation. So again, project examples that might benefit from this tool include habitat restoration, trail maintenance, debris removal, and even construction projects. If there are sensitive species that need to have a noise reduction level or require certain noise or air quality components, this would be on that. Our next tool is the NRCS's Soil Survey. This is kind of an odd tool and probably won't be utilized much, but it can provide some critical information for potential land acquisition and land conversion projects. So similar to our last tool that we looked at, the IPAC tool, it'll ask you to type in a general location. I prefer to use coordinates because it's a little bit more exact. But once you get to the area that your project is taking place in, you're going to be asked to create an area of interest, or an AOI. And within this area of interest, which is essentially just a polygon, you will be able to set the parameters for that and then click submit, and it'll populate with the types of soils that are within that area, as well as a soil profile. And so, as you can see on the bottom left of the screen, when I selected this polygon area, an empty lot in Los Angeles County, California, it is 100% urban land Metz Pico complex. This is highly unusual. Usually soils are, comprised of 3, 4, 5 plus different types of complexes. But in this case, for whatever reason, it is 100% of the soil unit. So if you click on that blue hyperlink, it'll actually populate a soil profile. And so it'll come up with this map, this Los Angeles County, California, southeastern part map unit description. And from there, you can, decipher what is important to your project. So maybe look at the composition of the soil, the landform, and even the farmland classification. So the interesting thing about farmland classification is this will indicate the level of protection that the soil is going to be given. So protected farmlands, and that means that these lands are not typically up for development, and they might have specific restraints to surrounding conservation projects. but protected farmlands include anything that are labeled prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance, or in this case, prime farmland if irrigated. So if there's a potential that the land can be used for farming, it's probably protected. And so with that, the soil survey tool might be a good addition if you're looking at habitat restoration, urban or rural farming projects, parks and open space development, or even, like I said, land acquisition and conversion. Our next tool is the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System tool. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act of 1968 protects various sections of the rivers in the US and labels them as wild, scenic, or recreational. So I've included the three definitions per the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And you can see that there's not a huge difference between the wild river and the scenic river, other than that there might be some access to a scenic river, but none to a wild river. But the recreational river is really, has development along their shorelines and might have undergone some impoundment or diversion in the past. So using the map, you can go ahead and click on any state that you want to look at. And I've selected two at random just to compare and contrast. And so in Illinois, there's only approximately 86,076 miles of river. And of that, it's 17.1 miles of the river are protected as wild and scenic. So that is less than 1% of the state's river miles that are protected. And that's indicated by the blue, the very bright blue that's on that screen. So on the other hand, Oregon has approximately 110,994 miles of river, of which 1,916.7 miles are designated as wild and scenic. They got to get that 0.7 in there. And almost 2% of the state's river miles are protected as wild and scenic. So you can see the vast difference between Illinois and Oregon. So of course, different states have different amounts of protected rivers. So I encourage you all to look at your state specifically to see what rivers are protected and maybe think about projects that involve river restoration, habitat restoration, and even park and open space, particularly along those recreational scenic river miles. Our second to last tool that we're going to look at is a tool of compliance. And this is from the Environmental Protection Agency's Enforcement and Compliance History Online tool, or ECHO. There are a couple tools that can be combined. And so ECHO can be combined with EJ Screen, but we'll only be looking at ECHO for this portion, and we will get into EJ Screen later. So just for fun, I wanted to throw this out there. I selected the zip code 32830, and you can take a guess as to where this is. But for those of you that don't know off the top of your head, this is the Disneyland Resort in Orlando, Florida. So you can see that all the little blue call-out bubbles are facilities. So there are 68 facilities found within the zip code, of which 0 have current violations, 0 have significant violations, 2 facilities have violations that have occurred in the past 3 years, and 2 facilities have formal enforcement actions against them in the past 5 years, and 1 facility with an informal enforcement action in the last 5 years. So this just gives you a quick snapshot at the area that you're looking at, and if there's a potential project that might float into one of these areas or might be impacted by one of these areas. So when you go and click, maybe there's a specific facility that you want to look at, and by all means, you can go ahead and look at that specific facility. But I just filtered, and I selected the filter facilities with formal enforcement actions within the last 5 years. And it pulled up 2 results. One is Harvest Power Orlando, and the other is Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. By clicking on the hyperlink facility name, you'll be able to pull up a detailed facility report. And so, on the left-hand side, you can see specifically I selected the Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the facility summary. And this is just a snapshot. If you go in, it scrolls for pages and pages of information. And so over here, you can see that there's no current violation identified as of their last compliance monitoring, which was May of last year. And we're looking specifically at the Clean Air Act for this particular facility. Although ECHO can be used for Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and the Superfund CERCLA Act. So there are multiple compliance statutes and laws that are being that are factored into this tool. So you can pull up the amount of the amount that they've been fined. So in this case, um, Walt Disney faced $10,050 worth of fines, which is really nothing when you think about it for Walt Disney resorts. But it's just an interesting tool and can actually be utilized for projects such as parks and open space conversion and development. You might not want to develop bad land or poor soiled land, or acquire land that has formal complaints on it. You can also look for cleanup sites and even possibly consider habitat restoration. This site is also great to find potential partners that might be interested in working alongside a conservation corps to help remedy their compliance issue. So our final environmental tool is another oddball tool, but one that I actually really love. It's called the National Inventory of Dams, and it's from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the USACE recently updated this platform, and it's full of data, maps, and really just awesome statistics. And while I don't anticipate many corps working on dam operations, this tool can be used for other purposes. So we'll just quickly take a look at the dams of Colorado. So I currently have it filtered to show a couple different things. The blue versus the red is just, is it state owned and operated, or is it federally owned and operated? And then you also have the little green circles in there, which is indicating if it has an emergency action plan required and if it has actually completed an emergency action plan required. So you can see that there are approximately 1,983 total dams in the state of Colorado, and 84 years is the average dam age in the state of Colorado. So, and with that, there's 8% of the dams in Colorado are federally regulated dams, while 99% of the dams are state regulated. So, and in the state of Colorado, only 3% of the dams are actually utilized for hydropower. So right off the bat, you get some really interesting statistics. And to further kind of drill down into that, I selected the Vega Dam, which is located in Mesa, Colorado. So the Vega Dam is owned and operated by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and it is mostly used for irrigation. So you can see that under structure information. You also can better understand what type of dam there are, and there are a lot of different types of dams. This one happens to be an earthen dam, and it was constructed in 1959. So another reason I selected this dam is because it shows that an emergency action plan is required, and that the last update to this emergency action plan was July of 2020. So it's pretty updated, which is good. And as more, climate change impacts are felt, more emergency action plans are going to be, updated along the way more routinely. And so you can see that there are a lot of different tools, a lot of different statistics and information just from this National Inventory Dam. So some project examples that might come out of this could be, habitat restoration, trail and road maintenance. It's important to access these for operations and emergency purposes, fish traps installation, sediment removal, and even infrastructure and jobs training in general. This site can also be used to identify which dams and reservoirs are in need of an emergency action plan, like I mentioned, and this could potentially help you all identify potential project partners through mitigation efforts. So now that we've had some time to look at the various environmental tools that are out there, you can all decide to try some of these out. So why don't you take a moment to test out one or two of the tools, and if you find anything interesting, please share it with each other, with your peers, with your staff, and play around with these tools. Like I said, they're all free, they're all available online, and so I encourage you all to kind of play around. You can't mess it up. So the next set of tools are newer in development and so important to the overall health of our communities. We'll be taking a look at three diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility tools, specifically related to environmental justice, historically redlined communities, and tribal and indigenous peoples. I do first want to acknowledge that as a white woman, I have not experienced the racist practices that many Black, Indigenous, and people of color have experienced. I am aware of my privilege and working to make others aware of the systematic racism that has shaped and continues to impact our communities and environment today. These tools I will be sharing are some that I use to help highlight the discriminatory practices of the past and that provide opportunities for collaboration and change. Before we dive into each of these tools, let's take a moment to review the terminology. So, when we say environmental justice communities, we're speaking of communities that have been historically and traditionally burdened by a lack of enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. These communities have often been subjected to environmental burdens and hazards, and often are communities of color, marginalized communities, and face common socioeconomic, language, and other barriers. Historically redlined communities are communities that have historically been subjected to racist practices that discouraged and decreased the investment of resources into neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, and other community building blocks. And tribal and indigenous peoples. These communities recognized by federal, state, and local governments, as well as those that self-identify outside of a known treaty, reservation, or other destructive parameter. Our first tool is one that I'm sure many of you have used, and it's the EJ screen developed by EPA. So this EPA tool provides information on air quality, pollution sources, socioeconomic factors, health disparities, and climate change. This tool is great for project description and even for measuring project outcomes and success. So again, just a random selection. I chose Columbus, Ohio, and this upper map in the left shows particulate matter 2.5, and the lower map shows asthma percentiles layered with people of color percentiles. So just a couple different views. When you're looking, you can see the different types of layers that are brought into EJ screen. So you can look at specifically environmental justice indexes, supplemental indexes, pollution sources, socioeconomic, health. So they all bring it into one GIS tool. I do want to say that as a reminder for this type of tool, the higher the percentile, the worse the environmental risk, or the higher the population that is impacted. So for example, you can see on the right map, people of color, right, the darker the red, that's in the 95 to 100 percentile. So more people of color are impacted in those darker regions. So moving on to our second DEIA tool, this one is also another one of my favorites. So the Digital Scholarship Lab of the University of Richmond combines history with data, and it is both upsetting and fascinating. Um, this tool can be great for project descriptions and for showing potential funders why a community needs resources. So I do want to say that this next slide has some language that is uncomfortable, so just wanted to give you all a heads up. So the purpose of this tool is to show where communities have been historically redlined or disinvested. So I chose, for example, El Paso, Texas in 1940. So sections of the city were labeled D for hazardous, and descriptions were racist and showcased intentional disinvestment of communities of color and immigrants. So you can see that what they've done is they've actually overlaid historic redlining maps, and they've just cataloged everything. So this is a limited tool because not every city that we have currently has red line maps, and even if they do, they're not all updated yet. But so you can see that based on color, they've in 1940, what they've done is they went ahead and they graded communities. So A for best, B for still desirable, C for definitely declining, and D for hazardous. And most of the C's and D communities are people of color, marginalized communities, etc. And so when you look at the description of, I selected this red zone, this D zone in the bottom right hand of El Paso, Texas. The description is uncomfortable and wrong and discriminatory. And so the language of the 1940s is it's one of those that it's awful to look at, but for purposes of getting new funding for projects, I think it's important to note and to utilize these types of tools. So not shown in these still shots are the scans of the actual map documents. And if you wanted to click on the compare all or the show scan, it'll actually show you the document, the actual document that they utilized to build out these maps. So please explore this on your own time, and I encourage you all to have conversations about what this means for your projects. Our final DEIA tool we'll review is another one of my favorites, and this one's not as uncomfortable as the last one, but it's called the Native Land Digital. And so the Native Land Digital is from a Canadian not-for-profit organization, and it began in December of 2018. So this really looks to catalog tribal and indigenous peoples as well as their native languages. So this is great for project descriptions and for creative ideas regarding land management strategies. I would also, consider consulting with various tribes and or partnering with them on particular projects based off of this map. So I'm currently working on a project that takes place in the Gulf of Mexico. And I kept hearing that there were very little tribal groups in this area. So I utilized this Native Land Digital to take a quick look. And you can see that there are actually multiple tribes with at least 5 languages known or spoken in the area. So when you can just kind of look around the various states. You can type in a specific specific location that you're looking to complete a project in. And you can search by treaty, and you can narrow based off of if you just want a territory, a language, or a tribe. And so I actually have it toggled on to show languages as well. And so what you're seeing on the screen is those 5 languages that are known in this Gulf of Mexico area. One of the interesting things about this is that they actually provide you with contact information. So if you want to verify that these are languages spoken or you want to contact a local tribe, they give you contact information, which is really convenient. Our last set of tools are going to be presented in a rather quick snapshot since they are geographic specific. So states and some counties often have their own mapping tools and data sets that can provide valuable information. I do encourage you all to look at your project site within the county and or state and see if there are specific GIS tools that can be utilized. I have provided some examples. So being that I am from California, I use California tools a lot. And California has a variety of platforms ranging from CalEnviroscreen, which is essentially like EJ-Screen, but just for California and based off of some California regulations. And we also have the Fire Hazard Severity, which is from CAL FIRE, which is our state fire department. And then we also have more specifically, like looking at a county level, we have a Parks Need Map, which is only for LA County, but other counties are looking into similar initiatives to identify communities that are park poor and require open space and open land. And we finally also have something called the Healthy Place Index, which also is a statewide index that looks at various demographics and where communities are impacted by health factors. So these are just a few of the tools that I use pretty regularly. Looking across some of the other states, though, we have Wyoming's Department of Environmental Quality that has an interesting, pretty comprehensive tool that is mostly shows mining permits, grazing rights, hunting passes, but it does include sensitive species and other various environmental factors and habitat data as well. An example from North Carolina, specifically looking at flood risk information. So that one is, you can see the North Carolina one is right in the middle of the screen. And so they've broken their flood risk down by county specifically. And then we look to South Dakota, and they have an environmental review tool, which is also pretty comprehensive. It includes information about waterways, invasive species, sensitive species, wetlands. So I think the biggest difference between the South Dakota environmental review tool is that they are looking more at environmental factors, whereas the Wyoming DEQ tool looks more at permits and applications. And then the other two on the screen, we have Oregon coastline tools. So Coastal Atlas, for those of you that might be from Oregon, has a variety of coastal management tools, including for the CZMA. They also have interesting coastal access inventory. So just a few from Oregon, all within one platform, which is really great. And then finally, we have a Massachusetts coastlines inventory, which when you see this map, there's various toggles and fields and layers that you can apply. So in this one, I just highlighted some of the watersheds and the water quality, just for an example. So keep in mind that most GIS tools utilize a common base of data, whether that's from the Endangered Species Act or from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service data, or if it's from a wetland specifically, or even flood hazard zones. These tools build on common data to provide a more in-depth tool for your state or your county. I encourage you all to take some time to get to know the various tools that are available to you through your state and local governments. If your state or county doesn't have a tool, but you think that one could be really useful, maybe perhaps partner with another local nonprofit or a GIS mapping technology firm or even a local agency to consider proposing a project. So out of the many tools presented, which ones are you most interested to try, particularly as related to your story and your mission? Take a couple minutes to discuss that amongst yourselves and your peers and your staff, and use this to kind of express interest in these tools. So now that we've seen what types of tools are out there, how do we apply these tools? So data should be used to support a statement or cause. It should also be used to highlight lessons learned and next steps. But keep in mind that too much data can drown out the purpose and personality. You still have to answer the grant question completely, uniquely, and intentionally. It does not do you any good to copy and paste data without actually explaining its significance. You also still have to deliver on your funding commitments, and data can help you showcase your accomplishments, but also highlight how to improve in future projects. Oftentimes, you can download map files from the tools presented and import them into Google Earth Pro, which is another free tool, and then include your project data to show the overlap or identify any information gaps. Just remember that any amount of data that you use can actually drown out your purpose and your personality. And I keep reiterating that because data is not going to do you any good if you just blanket it. I've seen one too many times on grant review applications. People just copy paste data in multiple questions and don't actually apply it, and they get a lower score. And just some general food for thought. Good data can become bad storytelling without interpretation and application. So remember to utilize that data to your benefit, but don't drown out your own voice. So, of course, the best way to learn how to apply data is by actually applying it to a case study. For you virtual viewers, I encourage you all to use this exercise to familiarize yourself with the various tools and to think critically about how you and your staff might approach the case study. You can also use this as an internal exercise among staff members. All right, so the pitch is in April of 2020, the president declared a major disaster for parts of Tennessee. Various counties, including Hamilton County, experienced severe storms, tornadoes, straight line winds, and flooding. And this is all part of a disaster notice that was declared. So Saudi Daisy, which is a real place, this is all very real. You can go look it up. Saudi Daisy sits in the southeast portion of Tennessee, approximately 22 miles from the state of Georgia. And a little bit more background on Saudi Daisy. So, is it urban or rural? It's a little bit of both. Historic coal mining town with factories and some industrial components up until the 1930s. Saudi Daisy is also extremely white, and 11.5% of people in poverty, according to the 2020 census. It is subject to the Cherokee Treaty of 1817, which ceded most of the lands and resources to the US government. Some past natural disaster history, flooding and tornadoes have been the most documented and costly disasters. Some critical infrastructure of note include the Tennessee Valley Authority's power, which is mostly through the Sequoia nuclear plant, which is about 7.5 miles from the center of Saudi Daisy, and then the TVA Chickamauga Dam, which is about 14 miles. So I encourage teams to come up with a project. It must be within the realm of a conservation corps. It should not be a capacity building project or a major infrastructure project. So it must be realistic. The project should be supported by at least 3 discussed tools, and these do not include the AI tools. The project can include any other data as needed. And my suggestion is that each team take about 15 minutes to research and write, and then each team be given about 2 minutes to pitch a project within these parameters. So have fun with this. On the next slide, you'll see some resources. And again, for the virtual viewers, I encourage you all to, kind of brainstorm, use it as maybe a staff development activity internally, and at least brainstorm some ideas about what tools you might use for this type of prompt. So here's a list of all the resources that we've gone over today outside of the open AI sources. And once you all have experienced these tools, kind of looked around, maybe at least look through the Saudi Daisy, Tennessee case study, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So with that, thank you so much for listening in. There is so much more to learn about data and tools. If you have any questions or need any help applying the tools presented, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the screen. And remember that data is a strong ally. Use it to help narrate your story, work towards your passion, and prove your passion.
Thank you so much, Kayla, for sharing information on all those useful tools. And thank you to everyone who joined the session today. As a reminder, the session and the materials will be available for the remainder of the conference. The Q&A will remain open as well, and we encourage you to post your questions to Kayla or TCN staff there. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at CorpsCon23.